Regional Coordinators. Welcome to today's training, Reimagining a Juvenile Justice System, Beginning with Better Mental Health. Data indicates that over 65% of youth in our juvenile justice system have diagnosable mental health conditions, many triggered by adverse childhood experiences. Symptoms of mental illness can be expressed in dangerous and often delinquent behaviors, and until the underlying psychological conditions are recognized and properly addressed, youth with mental illness who have entered the juvenile justice system can continue on a path of delinquency, eventually leading to adult crime. Our presenter, Dr. Alpha Stewart, will provide us with a better understanding of this problem and will describe work being done in Shelby County to address it. Dr. Stewart is Senior Associate Dean for Community Health Engagement at the UT Health Science Center in Memphis, where she is also Director of the Division of Public and Community Psychiatry, as well as Director of the Center for Youth Advocacy and Wellbeing. She is current President of the Association for Community Psychiatry, and in 2018 through 2019, she served as the President of the American Psychiatric Association, the first African American elected to this position in that organization's 175-year history. Dr. Stewart has received way too many accolades from her peers and others to mention in the time that we have here, but I'll just share the most recent one. She'll travel to New York next week to accept the Brain and Behavior Research Foundation's 2022 Humanitarian Prize in Mental Health. The announcement of this award states in part, she has dedicated her career to improving the most disadvantaged, She has dedicated her career to helping the most disadvantaged and underserved people living with serious mental illnesses in our community. And last but certainly not least, for those of us at TCCY, for the past several years, she has represented Shelby County well as a commissioner on the Tennessee Commission on Children and Youth. She is prized not only by that governing body, but by the staff as well for her expertise, thoughtful insight, and for her wit, wisdom, and humor. Dr. Stewart.
Thank you so much, Gwen, and good morning, everyone. I am truly honored to be here with you this morning to share the couple of things that I think I've learned along the way in doing this work. And I'm really proud to talk about some of the things that we are doing right now here in Shelby County, Memphis, Tennessee. I have a lot of time this morning, and so I thought that in order to make everybody's morning start off well, that I would go through my presentation and then leave some time for some Q&A. I've kind of glanced at the list of attendees, and it appears that we have representatives from all over the state of Tennessee, as well as a few people as far away as Connecticut, it looks like. So I'm looking forward to a really robust conversation with all of you as we move forward through today's talk. I'm gonna now try, technology has not been my friend this morning, let me just say that. This will be my third computer that we tried to make sure that I could both hear and see you all, as well as make sure that you can hear and see me. So if you can hear me, and I hope you can, I'll just get started with the sharing. And if you can't see it, let me know, and we'll figure out what we need to do. Let's see, how do I move this little box so that I can read? Okay, I think that should be good. Everyone can see. Yes? All right. Thank you, Claire Costello. Thank you. And Crystal Rose and Jada Campbell. Thank you all. Okay, so you heard from Gwen's introduction. This is my my topic for today. You know, 7 years ago when I joined the faculty here at the University of Tennessee Health Science Center, I came here for the specific purpose of working in this space. I was brought in at a time when here in Memphis, we were seriously challenged with some of the issues in our juvenile justice system, many of which have been resolved or on the way to being resolved. And certainly we are in a much better place today than we were 7 years ago. But 7 years ago, when I created the Center for what we then called Health and Justice Involved Youth, we were a small 2-3 person shop with an interest in doing something meaningful in the area of juvenile justice reform. So that was 7 years ago. Today, we have learned a lot. We've gained some terrific collaborative partners along the way. As you heard, we've been able to become what we consider one of the go-to agencies here in Memphis for children and their families who are in or at risk of entering the juvenile justice system because of untreated, undiagnosed mental health and untreated trauma-related psychological issues. As you'll see when I go through some of the slides on the data in the system, a lot of our kids are in the system because of those two issues. And so today's topic, reimagining, seems to be the theme for 2022. Coming out of the pandemic, we're trying to rethink and re-envision and reimagine what we can do differently across the board. And juvenile justice is no different. And because I'm a psychiatrist, I'm going to begin with providing better mental health. I want to thank TCCY, our region here under the leadership of Gwen Wright, and my entire commission members and the staff at TCCY for their assistance in helping me to learn more about how to do better at this work. So I'll start at the beginning, which is always a good place to start, with where we started this journey around a juvenile justice system. As you all know, I'm sure, because I've seen a lot of the areas or titles that you've been putting on the screen as you've been introducing yourself, everybody on the call today probably has some role or some responsibility in what we all know as the juvenile justice system. Early on, it was established as a place for rehabilitation and restoration, and not primarily as a source for punishment, with the understanding, even before we knew a lot about child development and the development of the brain as we do now. But even then, it was understood that children were constantly growing, evolving, and learning. And so an opportunity for rehabilitation and restoration really was the most important thing for those who had taken the wrong path, strayed off the right path, however it was defined from a moral, ethical standpoint. Being a child with a history of what is known as delinquent behavior was not a predictor for the rest of your life you would do these criminal things and therefore be someone who deserved punishment. So this is just a graphic illustration of the beneficent women mostly who were part of that early system, at least on what we would now call the service delivery part. They were women, particularly women of some means, who saw mostly boys at the time. Kind of strange that we've cycled back and that's what we're seeing, but who saw these wayward boys and sought to bring them into better behavior, and therefore have them grow up and become productive citizens, wise people who would help others. Our current system, which has evolved from those early beneficent days, grew out of two competing interests, if you will. On the one hand, there was a focus on prevention, intervention, and rehabilitation, hearkening back to the early days of the creation of the system, but it was to be balanced with punishment of the individual youth for the crime committed and to be sure to care for the public's safety. In many ways, we are still struggling to balance those two competing interests. And depending on events in your area, the kinds of behaviors that are most often highlighted, and particularly through the media, we often see that imbalance, which was the reason for putting the scales on the first slide. We often see that imbalance play out in a knee-jerk reaction to something that has happened recently that must be punished versus someone who is clearly trapped in a system mostly out of no control of themselves, uh, for whom, had we done some prevention, earlier intervention, or provided some rehabilitation, we might have been able to mitigate the circumstances under which we now see them before us. There's a clear timeline that is important to understand in the evolution of this system we have today across the country, and how it plays into how we respond to these young people. Beginning in the early days with that benevolence that I talked about from the beginning, where the first court, juvenile court, was established for the purpose of collecting these kids. And there was a kind of progressiveness in that time period where things like the best interests of the child, making sure that if parents were able to help them, but with parents who were unable, to help place the child somewhere where they would stay out of trouble. That was one of the prevailing goals during that period of time. And that lasted pretty much into the 1960s, when we got into the more due process era. And for the attorneys and juvenile justice individuals in the audience, you will remember the case that highlighted this, Ray Galt, where for the first time the issue of due process became a clear and prevalent part of the focus on what we do with young people who are somehow trapped in their justice system, in the justice system. We move forward then into a really difficult and challenging period for young people, particularly young people who were behaviorally challenged or who did in fact commit crimes, because that was known as the get tough era. This was during that period of time where the predator child, Wilding, the Central Park jogger case was probably the epitome of this period of time, where the sentiment was, forget this rehabilitation, increase the punishment. If you do the crime, you must do the time. It became easier for younger and younger children to be charged with the highest levels of criminal responsibility and in fact be treated as adults. And now we are in that period of time, thank God, where that period has ended in some respects, but not all, where we are now affirming and reaffirming that kids are not just small adults, that they are developmentally different, that they are responsibly and accountability wise different, and that we have to see them differently. And there's a series of cases that speak to some of these issues that are highlighted on the timeline. And Gwen, I think we can make these slides available to attendees after this, so people don't have to worry about trying to capture all of this. So that's sort of the system as it began. But now that we are in that period where we understand the role of child development, we understand the role of trauma, we understand what the social determinants of health and mental health and risk for those things impacting negatively on a child, we understand some of those things and that they matter. What does it look like if you don't have all of the things that contribute to children being trapped in these systems? What would that system look like? What would that child's environment look like if we didn't have all of those things? And here's a really great picture. If we didn't have all of the things that impact children negatively and create communities and environments where they are constantly being exposed to a toxic level of stress, and where all kinds of adverse experiences and traumatic incidents are a part of their day-to-day living. This would be what a healthy child development would result in. At the foundation would be all of the fertile ground, all of the positive attributes, all of the positive strokes and support that a child needs. And along this foundation would grow these pillars that would address their educational achievement and therefore the potential and opportunity for jobs and productive citizenship and rising out of any lower socioeconomic poverty status they may exist in, helping them to become more responsible citizens and to see that as a part of their responsibility as opposed to what everyone else does, and putting them on a path to much better lifelong health. It would also create the structure that would hold up the next generation of kids, because this generation would now be more successful parenting their kids than perhaps we see in some of the environments today where none of these pillars are in place. And the result would be a healthy economy and stronger communities so that the cycle would continue. Now, that's what would happen if we were able to assure that our children had the chance to not just be treated like little adults and to not be called juveniles. And to not have their trauma and mental illness diagnosed and treated. One of the challenges, and I'm so pleased to be here as a member of the Tennessee Commission on Children and Youth, because one of the challenges I have had over the last 5 years, especially, is with words. And it is my firm belief that what we call children impacts their behavior. And when you think about it, anybody listening today who has a child between, oh, I don't know, between 5 and 18, if you got up today and said to your child, my little juvenile, are you going to get up today and go out and do something criminal and disruptive and despicable? Are you going to harm somebody for no good reason? Are you going to, do something to property, damage it? Are you going to be the best criminal you can be today? I don't think we do that to our own children. And I cannot for the life of me imagine why we'd want to do that to someone else. Just the term juvenile conjures up this whole picture of that person that we don't want to be around, that individual who is out to do harm. And when you think about it, if you listen carefully to the news, even the children who are not perpetrating any kind of criminal or delinquent behavior. The lead story on a child who has been harmed in a car accident, who is the victim of a drive-by or a shooting in their neighborhood. The lead story says 3 juveniles were hurt today, as opposed to 3 children, 3 young people, 3 youth, 3 adolescents. It really doesn't take that much more time to say something that is not negatively charged and that will not leave a negative impression on the mind of that child. So we really all have to think consciously about the words that we use to describe children. And I must say proudly that the Tennessee Commission on Children and Youth took the bold step of changing the name of its Juvenile Justice Committee to Youth Justice almost a year ago now. And I am so proud to be part of an organization that understands the power of words when it comes to talking about our children. So I would encourage each of you to take on that mantle and fight the good fight on behalf of our children, to have them be called children, youth, adolescents, anything but kids, I'm told, because young people are very quick to tell us that a kid is a baby goat. But other than that, anything we can say that does not carry the negative weight of the word juvenile, I'm behind 1000%. And so when we do that, when we give them that label, what we are doing is contributing to a system that by its very design now is challenged to not do certain things. We have got to get out of the mindset that the best place for a youthful offender is that classic model where you group them all together in large, highly regimented penitentiary-like institutions, which I call grad school for criminal learning better criminal behavior. Anytime you put a number of kids for whom that is not the place they should be anyway, in with kids who have no other place to be because of the nature of their behavior. You're asking to have the kids who are there through no fault of their own learn from the other kids. And that means we're giving them a graduate degree in how to be a better criminal. The other thing is that as long as we follow the path of our current structure in the system, we're going to continue to see them as little adults. And we won't fully acknowledge the fact that because of their level of development, they really don't have a full set of moral and cognitive capabilities, which means they can't think through the consequences of things, and they really can't think. You know, when I was growing up, my mother famously said regularly, there is nothing between those two ears. And I took offense to it because I had a thinking brain and all of that, and I knew what I was doing. The reality is, the child's brain is not fully developed until in their mid-20s. Anybody with a kid who's come back home because of the pandemic and who thought they had gotten them off to a good start as young adults is seeing the behavior of a child in their home. And there is nothing we can do about it. The brain develops as it develops, but except acknowledge the fact that if we're expecting a 16-year-old to think like a full-grown adult of 25, 26, 27, we're never going to get our wish. We can help, we can support, we can remind, we can advise, but the reality is their underdeveloped brain works at its own pace, does as it wants to do, and sometimes that means that it's going to do things that are based on poor choices, like hang out with the wrong crowd, decide that it's okay to break the windows at the school at night, break curfew if you're in a place that has curfew, drive a car that's not their own, do all of those things up to and including more serious acts that could land them in the juvenile detention arena. And that when there are other risk factors that are significant, everything from something that's going on in the home, something that's in their family that they can't talk about, or something that they regularly encounter in their community without the protective factors that we ought to be providing as the adults in their lives, then what we're going to see are kids who make poor choices. These are things that are directed by a brain that is not fully developed. And what we have to do is be the strong adult in their life that reinforces better things for them, better choices, better behaviors, better things. And when it comes to trauma, we have to acknowledge that most of our kids today are growing up with some level of trauma as a part of their daily existence. And it's not just kids who grow up in underprivileged, under-resourced, poverty, persistent poverty areas. It's kids who have everything they could possibly need materially, but are lacking in some other things. The significant increase, for example, in the number of kids presenting in psychiatric emergency rooms with suicidal thinking and suicide attempts is testament to the fact that socioeconomic status is not a protective factor when it comes to being impacted by trauma. We talk about trauma, adverse childhood experiences, mental illness, and other things. So these are the things that we really have to pay attention to when it comes here. And we've got to acknowledge that they exist. This thing came back up. This is just a slide with a series of headlines and titles for articles that I just, if you just put in your search engine, whatever you use, trauma, mental health, kids, juvenile justice, young people, juvenile justice, any number of these things come up. And I want to just highlight a couple of them because I know that across the state of Tennessee, we have made some tremendous strides in the juvenile justice reforms based on this report. And I was very proud to be part of this ad hoc blue ribbon task force appointed by the governor in where we put our report together in 2017. That's been followed by an implementation group that I'm also on that will be sunsetting at the end of this year. So I would encourage everyone to take a look at the task force report and also the implementation council proceedings, because there's some good stuff in there. And if you haven't had a chance to look at it and figure out how to use some of that stuff, now is the time to do that. There are a couple of other things that are more recent, including this article here that was just published earlier this month in the Child Psychiatry Clinics of America. Because now we have to factor in light of some of the experiences of our children over the last 4 or 5 years, particularly throughout the pandemic and all of the issues around structural racism, anti-racism practices, and the fact that race has become a prominent yet challenging part of our day-to-day existence. And for our children, racism. Now's the time to really ground ourselves in how all of these things play a role in what we are seeing played out in the lives of our children. And there are a couple of people in the country, and I'm not sure if there's anybody from as far away as New York, but New York has a particular cohort of clinicians and researchers at Columbia and the State Psychiatric Institute that are really looking deeply at some of these things. Julian Ford, Chris Branson, Gina Vincent in Massachusetts. These are some of the leading thought leaders and researchers and clinical reformers, if you will, doing screenings and assessments and understanding trauma and creating treatment models that incorporate an understanding of trauma. There's a lot we can do, and we know a lot of these things. This is another sampling of just a couple of things. Ground yourself and your programs and the young people and families that you work with in this arena in some of the concrete evidence-based things that we know about treating kids in the juvenile justice system and doing it in a way that is both trauma informed as well as addressing any unmet mental health needs that may be driving them into the system. Again, very proudly, I have a chapter in the book, Not Just Bad Kids, on setting the stage and talking about just the things I've just been talking about, that we have to acknowledge certain things that are going on in the lives of our children, in their communities, where they're growing up and where they're going to school, where their families are trying to make a good life for them. These are some of the things that lead to that path into the justice system. And in the book, for example, we talk a lot about how the translation of disruptive behavior becomes the default into getting kids into the justice system, because it's the behavior we're looking at as opposed to what's causing the behavior, which could be the trauma in their lives, the unmet mental health needs. I would encourage everyone to take a look at OJJDP's Journal of Juvenile Justice. This particular issue in the spring of 2016 had so many great articles. Each issue has some focus, but this had so many great articles about what we're talking about today: mental health as part of the juvenile justice system reform process. And then the Child Mind Institute has this whole report with strategies and models and toolkits and other things that I would just commend to you for reading later. The state of Tennessee embraced in the last administration the notion that adverse childhood experiences were a part of the struggle we are having with understanding how to best serve our children. Based on some landmark work done by Vince Folletti and Bob Anda through a different population than we now are thinking about ACEs with. But it set the stage for us to really take a critical look at the things that happen in childhood that leave an impact later in life, and that create for many of our young people the adverse conditions under which they grow up and under which their health and mental health can be impacted. I found this online, and I really had never seen it before, but it literally is the graphic ACEs questionnaire. And for those who follow the ACEs literature, it is a questionnaire surveying your experiences before the age of 18 that may help to explain some of the issues, health and psychological and behavioral issues that you are having now. And it's a 10 question questionnaire that when you go through it, Each question is scored 1 if it is present or if you experienced it. And so anybody who scores over 4, we generally recommend that they look to talking to someone, getting counseling, taking a deeper look at of those 10 questions, which were the 4 that they answered positively. And so this is like a graphic illustration. So instead of having the 10 questions, this actually allows you to walk through it with someone. And remember, ACEs questionnaires are for adults who are looking back. There are different tools to assess current state of adverse childhood experience for kids, but it is a wonderful tool to think about an adult who is being challenged in some way with alcohol or drug abuse, who has a mental illness, who's been incarcerated, who's the victim of or victimizing others with abuse, who's grown up in a household where they were never made to feel good enough, who came through life with a family where there was separation or divorce, or where they were sexually or physically abused. These are the kinds of things that we need to know about everybody that we see, and it isn't always easy to ask these questions, especially when you're not clinically trained to do it. But this allows anybody to talk about ACEs with anyone else, no matter what your background. So I just thought I would share this with you. And I don't know the organization that created it, but I really like the way they put it together, and I'm going to use it now instead of putting up a slide with the 10 questions of the ACEs questionnaire. Another graphic illustration, and you'll see a lot of pictures because words lose their magic after a while for me. But when I look at a picture that has, this is what we're looking at, and I apologize. I think I have copied this so much it's starting to get a little blurry. I'm going to try to go back to the original and do it better. But 65 to 70% of the kids in the juvenile justice system have at least one diagnosable mental health disorder. So if you are looking at a population of kids who are part of the system, you are guaranteed that up to 3/4 of them have a diagnosable mental illness. That means, since we know that the ability to provide treatment in these systems is limited, that means that kids are coming in with problems that we can't even take care of while we have them under our supervision. Another 70% have experienced at least one traumatic event. Almost half are functioning below their academic grade level. 30% have a learning disability and have a history of some physical or sexual abuse prior to the time we get them in the detention, incarceration space. That's a lot of damage that has been done to a child who is now in a system and in a place where we're not guaranteed that we're going to be able to treat any of those things. Another graphic illustration of what's in the past of the kids we now have in our correctional facility. 72%, something very bad or terrible has happened to you. 70% have seen someone severely injured or killed. A third have attempted suicide. These are significant numbers. 59%, if you are abused as a child, increases the likelihood that you will be arrested as a young person by 59%. Upwards of 90% of girls who are incarcerated have in their background sexual, physical, or severe emotional abuse in childhood. This is what we are looking at, folks. These are the experiences, particularly early in childhood, that make it extremely predictable that individuals are going to be at substantially higher risk for involvement with violence, interpersonal, youth violence, intimate partner violence, dating violence, or child abuse, which is the gateway into our incarceration system for young people. All of these are most of the reasons that many of our young people wind up before us in some way in a detention setting. I really do love this because the story of ACEs is often told about the pictures and words above ground. And what this says is that the ground in which this tree grows is the poorest, the least fertilized, the most damaging, and least likely to grow something that can thrive. Poverty, discrimination, disrupted communities, lack of opportunities in so many areas, poor and unstable housing stock, violence in their environment, their community, their home. And then above ground, all of the things that we know are part of the spectrum of ACEs experiences. So when you think of ACEs, don't think just of the above ground tree where all of these things are happening. Think also of the things that are underground that contribute to these roots not really being solid and good and thriving. I like to say that if you hear a talk about ACEs without a pyramid, it's probably not a talk about ACEs. And now, if you hear a talk about ACEs with a pyramid, but don't get the benefit of these last three levels, then it's an incomplete talk about ACEs. Because now we understand the literature, the research tells us that in addition to all of these things, these adverse childhood experiences, the toxic stress, the way that impairs the young person developmentally, what it leads to in terms of developing these high-risk behaviors that result in long-standing disease, disability, and problems socially and early death. In addition to that, we have to factor in the kind of generational historical trauma that we now know is transmitted, epigenetically transmitted, and the assault of the microaggressions, the implicit bias, the structural racism, those social conditions locally and globally that result in a complex form of the trauma that goes beyond adverse childhood experiences, because now we're talking about what the body keeps score on. That is part of our DNA, and then all of those other things that result in early death. So think of the broader pyramid these days as you look to take each individual case that you are working with. Think of it in terms of this broader pyramid and try to figure out along these lines, what is it that we can do to offset or to neutralize, mitigate some of the things that have happened long before that person even realized they were having these adverse childhood experiences. I put this together because I know that when you're working with children, you're working with their place of work, which is school. And I really do want us to understand, starting here, we look at a child in a classroom and think, oh, their behavior is disruptive and they're talking back to the teacher and all of these things, when we really ought to be thinking, I see you. I understand that you're having some really significant emotions, and because of your undeveloped brain, you really don't know how to direct them appropriately and express them in a manner that does not result in a behavior that's going to get you into the disciplinary track, which is the gateway into the justice track. So if you start with I see you as part of your interaction with that child, helping them to understand that this is a safe environment, helping them to get to a place where they can begin to regulate and de-escalate themselves, teaching them before how to deal with these things. It will mean less trouble forming relationships. And for everybody who's got that favorite teacher that they remember fondly, you know that there was something about him or her that always made you feel like you could do anything, say anything, talk to them about anything. And even if they didn't have the answer, just being with them and having them listen to you meant that they saw you. For most of these kids, nobody sees them. And then we have to understand that they have major challenges. Again, undeveloped brain. Just keep saying that to yourself. We have a frontal lobe that reminds us not to stick our heads out of the car window and try to not hit the pole as we drive past it, or put our leg down and scrape it along the street, or drag race, or shoot a gun into a crowd. I mean, we have a frontal lobe that tells us that's probably not the best idea. But for kids who don't understand that they have to self-regulate in the absence of that frontal lobe, We have to support, coach, and then model an approach that allows them to understand self-regulation and how to do it. And we have to provide something that negates the negative thinking. For many, they've been called bad kids for so long, they've begun to accept that. They've adopted the fact that they are just bad kids. That's why we call the book Not Just Bad Kids. But they fear, most of all, that something they do is going to be a mistake and they're going to be abused. These are kids who have internalized, I'm a bad kid, I'm going to get something and I deserve to get it. We have to dissuade them from that belief and change that negative thinking, because now they're hyper vigilant. They are looking around every corner at every person, wondering, are you the one who's going to disappoint me? Are you the one who's going to harm me? Are you the one who's going to lie to me and say it's going to be okay and then leave me to my own devices and have harm come to me? And they're hyper vigilant, and their fight or flight response is out of control. This is the child who cannot be calmed, who cannot be comforted. Once the assault, as they perceive it, is done, they cannot regulate. And their only option is to fight with you or to run. And we all know that runaway kids often wind up in the justice system simply because they're runaway kids. We don't always go back and find out why they have run away. The executive function challenges are clear. No functioning brain. No functioning brain. Say that to yourself every time you hear, see, or think about a child that is being challenged behaviorally. They don't know how to plan. They don't know how to organize their thoughts. They can't make good decisions, and they don't learn from past mistakes. As much as we would like to think they are able to do that, they simply cannot. Oops, sorry, went the wrong way. They simply cannot. My medical student, Walter Siv, put this slide together when he was here with us doing some research. And I thought, what a wonderful graphic from a person with very little knowledge coming into this, who captured well the sequence of events from that early childhood trauma to the rewiring that happens physically in our brain, and how that translates into this behavioral and emotional dysfunction, which puts them on the path to being part of the criminal justice system. In essence, that childhood trauma leads to the brain's development being harmed. Essentially, our brain is a big electrical circuit, and every traumatic experience does some damage. It rewires something in a way that is not positive and that can be undone, but it takes a trauma-informed approach to not do more damage. And when you add in a continuing exposure to violence, i.e., toxic stress, your body, your brain is bathed in that enzyme, the stress enzyme cortisol, and that hyper exposure to that creates a steady state of toxic stress, and that is not easy to recover from. And I always like to give Walt his due for capturing this, because in any conversation about youth crime, wherever you are, this is what you have to remember to explain to law enforcement, legislators, teachers, parents, community leaders, that in many respects, things that start here are what lead to the things that wind up with the kids being here. And there's a lot of places in between, and I'll talk about that in a minute. There are a lot of things in between these points where we can do a great intervention and reverse some things. So the kid goes to juvenile detention. What's the harm? They learn a lesson, they understand that crime doesn't pay. They did the crime, they have to do the time. Well, unfortunately for us and for those young people, even after they leave, upwards of 15 years, according to this study at Northwestern University, they have long-term struggles with mental health and their stability in life. They have significant problems with behavior and substance abuse. Men are more than 3 times more likely than women to have a persistent psychiatric disorder that might not have existed in the significant level that it does had they not had this experience in detention. And because of the challenges with mental health that contribute to and add on to the other challenges in the lives of the majority of these young people who are Black and brown kids, mostly boys, it makes it even harder for them to achieve some of the milestones that are evidence of a successful transition to adulthood. One of the things we know based on studies like this is that a therapeutic approach called multisystemic therapy seems to work well as an alternative to detention and incarceration. It's specifically designed for kids who are exhibiting signs of serious mental health and behavioral problems, and is actively used in many programs for these kids to help to mitigate some of the issues. This is my prize slide on stopping use of the word juvenile, but it's also a way to introduce how we can provide better care for these kids. We stop calling them names, and then we look at ways to transform how we work through the system of care or using a system of care. And I've seen a lot of people logging in who are part of the statewide system of care across Tennessee. So these are my people, system of care folks. I welcome you to this conversation. So this is one of my favorite slides. It's busy. Don't try to read the whole thing. It's what we call a sequential intercept mapping slide chart. And that's a evidence-based approach to looking at the whole system. We did this about 4 or 5 years ago, I think now, here in Shelby County, looking at in the early days of how we might want to transform the system. And I think I saw Tamika on, I think you're on. And over here in this red block is the current Shelby County Youth Family Family and Youth and Family Resource Center, which is our latest youth assessment program as part of an effort to divert kids who are in the community from coming deeper into the system. And basically what this is kids are contacted or make contact with the juvenile justice system in the community through their schools, through their community programs where they may have an initial contact. For those who are determined to be, in some way needing some level of intake because whatever they have done in the community rises to a level of confronting someone in the system or interacting with someone in the system. And so there's this whole line of things that could happen short of detention per se. There are kids for whom a deeper entry into the system is required, and there's some judicial processes. For some or both of these groups of kids, there is the possibility for some diversion into a non-judicial area. Everything in the system has some ultimate disposition, no matter where you start in the system. And then if you are in the system in some way, there has to be a process for you to re-enter your community. And this box that's kind of cut off down here is another community box. Well, what I've added, and this was, as I said, 5 years ago, and we had 50 plus people representing law enforcement, the legal community, the DA and the public defender. In fact, the session was hosted by then public defender Stephen Bush. And the university sponsored with the public defender's office. We hosted it on campus. We had schools, we had DCS, we had the Department of Mental Health. It was a cross section of everyone from city and county government, from every walk of child serving agencies, private nonprofits in the community that sponsor pro-social activities for kids, mental health providers, just about anybody you could think of who had a hand in touching children who would ultimately become part of the justice system. These were the people who were there, and there were over 50 people in the session that day. And we came up with this very complicated thing. And the only reason I'm showing it to you today is because trying to get back to show you these red parts. Here is something that Memphis and Shelby County Schools has started, the evening wellness centers. We took time to really take a critical look at what was going on in the schools. And from this moment, 4 or 5 years ago, we are now adding the things in the red boxes. The Youth and Family Resource Center that I mentioned earlier was the second iteration of a youth assessment center that had begun shortly after this sequential mapping session was done. So now we're in our second generation of this to keep kids from coming into the system, to stop them in the community. What I did not put here was the precinct liaisons, which are now available in 3 or 4 of the police precincts, where in the community where the child may be contacting law enforcement, there is now the capacity to do things in their community instead of everyone having to come downtown. And over here on the reentry side, I am very pleased to announce that our Center for Youth Advocacy and Wellbeing was just funded in collaboration with Shelby County government and the Division of Community Services to have the first Shelby County Youth Reentry Program, so that we can add something for the kids who are returning to their community, something structured, something formal, something that is resourced to help them readjust to life in their community and to bring some different skills back into that community living for them. So these are 3 concrete things that came about as a result of this full planning session. And I will tell you, this was a day and a half of hard work. It's time for another one. So if there's anybody out there interested in doing some more planning, because a lot of this stuff is different now, and I didn't go in and make changes to everything. I just added a couple of critical things that I thought we should all be aware of, because one of the mistakes I think we make as a system is we assume we always have to start from square one. This is a roadmap, and while some things have changed, some haven't. Some of the things, we now have a new juvenile court judge, a new district attorney. We have the continuing support of both the sheriff's office and the police department in the work that we are all doing. We have an active juvenile justice board. We have the Juvenile Justice Consortium. We have a group of young people who are organizing themselves to create a mechanism to assure that kids can get the services that they need from a mental health standpoint. So there's a lot that has changed, but there is a process that we can use that is evidence-based. So when it is successful, we can take it to legislators and funders and other people and say, in Shelby County, we know what we're doing because we've taken this evidence-based approach, and we've already seen some of the successes in reentry, in providing school-based services, in addressing things in the community before kids and families have to deal with the judicial part of the system. We already know how to do some of those things, and that's how you reimagine juvenile justice. Because we got to challenge the public's view and the sensibilities of the people who don't work in this space every day, who think the answer is being tough on crime when they're dealing with a group of adolescents whose brains don't even understand what tough on crime means. And that we can deconstruct some of the policies and practices that haven't worked because they are mostly punishment and trying to use them as deterrents, when in fact we have some policies and practices that do work to deter young people from getting involved. It's not what's wrong with you, it's what's happened to you. Commissioner Charlie Caswell, this ought to be his tagline. He doesn't go anywhere without reminding people of that. And what would happen if, instead of relying on our kids to become more resilient, we created a world that is less traumatic and traumatizing? And I will say, the explanation of how trauma impacts these children is not an excuse. It is truly an explanation so that our systems can be better at responding to their needs. That's the deterrent practice that we need, better responses to what they need. And for any Homer Simpson fan out there, I could not resist. I could not resist showing this slide. You know, when you're looking at a child and their eyes glaze over and you think their mind is wandering, this is what that is. My mind wandering instead of listening to the conversation I'm taking part in right now. Homer's a grown man, or some would say he looks like a grown man, but this is what the child's mind looks like. It's just wandering. The more we talk to them about what they should do, it just wanders on its own. This is a slide. I won't go into great detail, but as you can see, there are individual, family, peer, and community kind of domains to look at both risk factors and protective factors. And throughout, you can pretty much match um, you can pretty much match that if you have a lot of these risk factors, you're going to wind up in some way, shape, or form in the presence of someone that is either disciplinary or justice related because of the behaviors that go with these things. If you have more of these things, you have a much better shot at being on a path to thriving. And Frederick Douglass said it better than I ever could. It's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. I put this in with the picture because this is my mantra. Risk factors are not predictive factors due to protective factors. And I learned this, and I often call his name, but I never shown his picture. This is Dr. Carl Bell, the late Dr. Carl Bell, a psychiatrist from Chicago, who taught me this as the basis for creating the protective factors that every child needs and deserves to become a full-fledged, positive, thriving adult who is responsible and can take responsibility because we give them the protective factors that we adults have. And I wanted to just honor Dr. Bell today and show his picture. Some of you in the audience have heard him speak when he was here in Memphis, and you know his work. But this is the most important thing I ever learned from Carl. So we can do some things to be that protective factor, and here's some of them. We can create more stable families using what we know to be helpful in terms of financial stability. We can promote those things in society that protect kids against violence in their home, in their community, in their school. We can help them get off to a good start with what we do in school, pre-K, preschool, child care programs, early literacy programs, support for the growing child and their needs in a school setting, and support for them to have the opportunity to learn to self-regulate. One of our partners, Jeter K through 8, has their own space for the kids in the schoolroom, in the schoolhouse, so that kids know they have the authority to go to this safe space when they feel themselves out of control, their quiet space to go. And Principal Eric Harris is to be commended for that, and for creating that and understanding the importance of that in having a trauma-informed school. We can talk about how kids can develop healthy relationships by modeling those things, but also by teaching them healthy relationship skills. We can have the activities where we connect children and their activities with adults who can be there, not just to mentor them, but to show the caring that comes with protective factors that adults bring to relationships. And then we can learn as much as we can about ACEs and family-centered treatment and the various therapies that contribute to reducing the harm of trauma in the lives of children and families. And in reimagining juvenile justice, we can work really hard to keep kids in their homes or communities where those supports can be added as opposed to sending them away. We can do the police precinct liaisons. We can have school-based truancy meetings. We can do the overlapping of what happens in school with what goes on in the community and use community folk who are trained and understand and knowledgeable and aware of the impact of trauma on the kids in their neighborhood. We make sure here at the Center for Youth Advocacy and Wellbeing, we don't do anything with a child that does not involve the family. We believe that the wraparound approach is the only approach that will help these children and their families feel like they're getting what they need, because it allows them to guide getting what they need. We use family support specialists whenever we can, who are people with lived experience of having a child in the system. And we hope to do more of that. So if there's anybody on the webinar who's interested in becoming a family support specialist, please contact us at 901-448-4200 and get some more information. Um, the other stuff here, finally, we use data whenever we can, because a part of my job as the director of the center is to make sure that the people who support these things, whether they're elected officials, whether they are school officials, funders, we want them to know that when we propose a program model, we have done the research, tried to collect data, or will be collecting data to demonstrate its effectiveness, and that we create interventions that can be used at all points along the juvenile justice continuum. It is our job to break generational trauma. The kids who grow up with grandparents who say they're stupid or not good enough need somebody protecting them, saying, I'm proud of you, I love you, for them to grow up to be strong and positive. What does that look like? It looks like, I saw someone put in the book reference, Bruce Perry's book earlier. There are lots and lots and lots of opportunities for us to share this information that's already been collected by a variety of people. It didn't start with you talks about how we inherit our family's trauma and what we have to do or can do to end that cycle. The Body Keeps Score. Dr. Nadine Burke Harris has a book. I mean, there's lots of material. So you're not just shooting from the hip with this stuff. You can recommend to families that they read it. You can read it as part of the therapy with them and help them to understand how it shapes their behavior and their family dynamic. You can refer. And here are some of the reasons why you make a referral to programs like ours, or to the local mental health center, or to your local trauma focused treatment provider, or to the program at the church or the school to work with families and kids in these areas. Refer, refer, refer. And remember this flow chart. These are things that each of us along the way can do to help for kids who are in school. We've already talked about MST. Another graphic that I really liked, because at the bottom here, one page, pretty colorful, a lot of words, but they're good words, where we can talk about what to do early on. We can talk about what to do in schools, just a couple of things in each category so that everybody walks away saying, well, I can do that. I can advocate. I can provide resources. I can collaborate. These are things that we can all do. And this slide, I'm coming to the end now, but this slide is my most proud mama period, because these are the 5 programs that we have here at the Center for Youth Advocacy and Wellbeing. And as you look at this, you can see that each of them has some collaborative relationship with other parts of the system. All of them are involved with our schools. Most of them are involved with the juvenile court. All of them have an ACEs or trauma-informed approach. They organize around mental health need, various ages, various settings. We give them cute names so that people in the community say, oh yeah, that's that GIFTS program. GIFTS has to do with gang intervention, but you don't want to say gang intervention. That's a dead giveaway and people run the other way. You say GIFTS, you're adding something, you're giving them something to help them create some protective factors in their community against these things. We're even now working with kids with chronic illnesses and those who've experienced these traumatic injuries based on community and gun violence. So we're expanding, and what's not on here is our new reentry program. And we're not going to give it a cute name. It's just going to be the Shelby County Youth Reentry Program. I added this because our partners at Memphis and Shelby County Schools, you saw the little red box on the SIM map. This is the graph from the schools that includes their evening wellness centers. And in this column, it's where we have those programs where our partners at Memphis and Shelby County Schools have now created something in the evening for our families who need to have something after school. This is kind of my version of a pyramid to talk about winning community juvenile justice partnerships and who has to be there. Legislative officials, our own state representative, Tori Harris, was here with us a couple of months ago for our juvenile justice board, is a strong supporter of these kids and reforming the juvenile justice system and having better mental health for them. And so putting legislative officials who make regulations, pass laws, and appropriate money at the top just made sense. A picture with our new juvenile court judge, Sugarman, and Tamika, who is the director of our Family and Youth Resource Center, or Youth and Family Resource Center, and myself. And then our friend in Davidson County, Juvenile Court Judge Sheila Calloway, who is helping to spread the message about mental health, trauma, and other things, and how we really can reform our systems to give better mental health to the kids who need it. I initially thought someone thought this was a picture of me, but it's not. It is one of my favorite people because I think she speaks to, and I point a lot, but I think she speaks to everything I've said today. Every child deserves a champion, that adult who doesn't give up on them, who understands there's power in making connections, and who consistently says to them, become the best you can possibly be. That's part of creating the protective factor that our kids need to hear from us. And finally, in an effort to lead like Madiba, I believe it always seems impossible until it's done. So, strong communities raise strong kids. ACEs don't have to be a barrier. And I will end with this end slide on all of the things that we do here. And if you look us up on our UT webpage, uthsc.edu/CYW, this is what that page looks like. We have a place for you to make a referral here and request for assistance. All of our programs are listed here. We'll be updating this for our reentry, and we'll be changing this picture. But thank you for that and your attention, and I will stop sharing now, and we have a little time for some questions. Thank you very much.
I don't know if you noticed all your applause that you were getting, Dr. Stewart.
No,
There were little
sorry.
hearts and hands up the screen. You've gotten lots of
everybody.
accolades in the chat as well. Thank yous. Lots of comments. One comment I wanted to note said, Karen says it's so important to make sure schools are included in working with children that have been identified as a risk. You did get a couple of questions.
Okay.
Early on. Greg asks, is this similar to the ACEs form? I think he's referring to the ACEs survey.
That graphic that I showed, it's just a graphic representation of those same 10 areas. Yeah.
And then one early question was, how does the number of kids with mental health conditions compare to children in the child welfare system who are not juvenile justice involved?
That's a good question, and I don't have a ready answer, but it is something to take a look at. I honestly don't have the data on segregated out for kids with mental illness in DCS custody or child welfare, depending on where you are, and kids who might be in the justice system where where I have more data on the rate of mental illness in those kids. It's something though I will ask my team to remind me that we should take a look at.
Megan Gaylord asks, she says, I am a trainer for Shield of Care for the state. What can we do to equalize services and trauma awareness in each detention center?
Now, I just reimagine mental health services. I'm afraid, Megan, that I don't know how to answer that question. Each juvenile justice jurisdiction operates the way that they operate. I would love some standardization, like the use of the cans is now across the state. So we know we have a standardized assessment tool. I think what I would recommend is that the one place that seems to coordinate well is the administrative office of the courts. And I don't know if Stephanie Etheridge is on, but it would be Stephanie Etheridge, and I apologize to the new director whose name I am not remembering there, because I knew Director Tate for so long, and I do apologize to the new director. But I think the place to start would be a conversation about taking the results from the Juvenile Justice Reform Report and the Implementation Council and looking for opportunities to have a standardized way to approach mental health. I think the actual implementation of services is going to depend on resources in each particular area. There are some jurisdictions that are small and there are limited opportunities to provide mental health services directly there. But at least it's worth a conversation. And I don't know if Richard Kennedy is on, but this may be something that comes before one of the TCCY committees. I saw Amy and I think I saw Carrie Virgo's name, and I know Gwen is here. So maybe with all the people who are here who understand the importance of mental health for kids in these systems, that there can be Michelle Long. Thank you, thank you. Someone put in the chat, and it just popped up, the director of the AOC. So
Okay.
thank you for that. I missed the name of the person who put it in, but thank you.
It was Dana.
Okay, thank you, Dana.
Megan also added to her question. She said no JDCs are the same. No two JDCs are the same, and there is a great need for standard training for the 40 hours they need each year.
Mhm. Well, the training piece now, that's different. I think there can be some standardization for the training, and I would love to talk with someone about that because I think we know enough about kids in detention that we could, the combination of trauma and ACEs, the combination of mental health, and some of the organizational structure around incorporating families where we can, making sure that we include DCS for kids who are under their supervision. I do believe there is the opportunity for that. And of course, spreading the word about family support services as one expanding way, there's one way to expand capacity to offer services and training. I think that is certainly doable. I, for example, would love to see a family support specialist attached to every detention center. I just think that I'm a big fan of theirs. I've seen the work that they can do. I've seen the difference they can make when the traditional system fails families. I've seen them bring people back into the system to get the care that they desperately need and that their child needs. And I've watched them walk hand in hand with someone who is fearful of the system because they don't understand it, because they've seen how it mistreats. And this is particularly important in communities of color and where English is not the first language, or where someone has a strong history of interaction with the system that has not gone well. And I just saw someone put in the transitional age group for kids who are aging out of DCS or child welfare custody and also aging out of the juvenile justice system. There is a big chasm. It's not just a crack, it is a chasm in terms of what opportunities there are for service and how we provide those services, because neither system is appropriate yet.
Karen added another comment. There's a struggle with kids having placements if they end up in foster care too. Foster families that have training are just not out there.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
There's been several comments about your words, making sure words are very important.
Mhm.
I'd like to give everybody a heads up. The youth justice piece that was added to our TCCY that our committee changed to was Dr. Stewart's idea. She didn't mention that.
It doesn't matter. I don't need credit for it. I am amazed and marvel at the fact that it was done and sets a model for the rest of the state to feel okay not saying the child is the juvenile. I'm not asking to change the name of the juvenile justice system yet. That will come later. But if we can stop calling kids these names, then I think we go a long way in helping them to believe in the rest of the system.
One other question. Do you or anyone else have resources for gang intervention? I'd love to have some resources to add to my resource binder for this in our community that addresses the mental health needs for the children who struggle with gang interactions and involvement.
Well, if you are in the Memphis Shelby County area, you should reach out to us, 901-448-4200. If you're not, you should email us and we can share the resources that we have. I would also encourage everyone on the call, wherever you are, start checking regularly OJJDP website. There are opportunities, funding opportunities, training opportunities. And I know writing a grant can be really feel overwhelming, but trust me, over the last 4 years, we have written at least 5 OJJDP grants, and we got funding for 4 of them. And it's not because we're just that great at writing grants, although we do a good job, but it means that you start a process where you get funding to do some things that you really want to do, that you can then use the data to convince people in positions of power, funding, legislation, regulation, state allocation. Your elected officials love to say, we get notice about our grants through our Representative Steve Cohen here. His office finds out first and announces it to the world. Then we get the official notice. We do the work. We let him know we've done the work, and he announces that. That gives us great publicity here locally. It announces to local foundations and other funders that we can be trusted with money to do things. It allows elected officials, no matter what side of the aisle they're on, to say, well, gee, if they could do it in Memphis, maybe we should try it up here in Tipton County, or, you know, that everybody wins. So spread the word, go after some of that money. Don't be afraid. It is a challenge, but you can do it.
So Delta's the one that asked about the resources, and she entered also, I'll call you for sure. So be expecting a call from Delta.
Okay. And if you can't get me, let me just tell you now, if you can't get me, there are 2 people you should ask for. One is Dr. Laura Harris, and I know she's on here somewhere, but that same number will get you Dr. Harris, or Keena Vassar, Bassar. And I saw our Juvenile Justice Board other colleague, Kimbrell Owens. I think I just saw something come up from her. Kimbrell also knows about us. Kimbrell is with the juvenile court. And so she keeps tabs on us all the time. And then, of course, Gwen Wright, who's the regional director for our area, is always able to find me. She found me to do this today.
It was hard.
But you know how to keep plugging away. There we
Yes,
go.
sir.
Okay, Laura, Dr. Harris has put her contact information in the chat for you.
I think that's about all of our questions so far. Anybody else got any more questions? I'm still looking.
It looks like someone has a hand up. Is that Tamika with her hand up? Because I would love to hear from her if she's still on. Maybe that was an old. And if there's anybody on from Memphis Shelby County Schools who wants to talk about the Evening Wellness Center, or if my team wants to talk about the Shelby County Youth Reentry, Lolita, are you on and want to talk about what we're doing with kids coming back from Wilder, from kids that are coming out of the detention center? It's really some great work to be able to offer young people and their families who have been at the YDC and perhaps estranged from family because of distance or not being involved, it's really nice to see a path being created for us to begin working with them before they are released, so that the return home is less traumatic for them. Okay, give us a call, Rebecca Sage. Give us a call or an email. You will have the email address for us. Someone to come to Jackson. Jackson's only 90 minutes, so we might be able to work that. It's popping up now so that I can see it, Jerry, when they pop up. So if
We're
you're
getting lots
looking
of
for
thank
someone-
yous.
if you're looking for someone to come talk, my team is available. If you're looking, for, oh, I saw something from Tamika. Maybe she's having the same challenges we had earlier with technology. Because there was something in the chat I just couldn't see. Yeah, this is a calling, as I heard someone say to me last week. This is part of our calling. The people who do this work don't do it because it's the best paid job. They do it because they have the passion for it. And we really enjoy working with people who share our passion for this. I can't believe that I have run out of questions. But I want to just thank everyone for your attention, for listening to me, for letting me ramble on today. It's been truly my honor to be with you, to see some of my old friends scrolling down the attendee list, and an impressive number of attendees, I might add. Over 200 people apparently.
We actually
today.
had over 400 registered, Dr. Stewart.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, I'm glad half of them showed up. I'm glad.
We are too. Thank you
Okay.
so much for doing this for us. We appreciate you, and your graphics and your slides are always awesome. We didn't have a doubt at all.
Well, thank you. Thank you. It's always a pleasure to be asked. And I will get these. Should I just send them to you, Jerry, and Gwen, or?
If you'll send them to Gwen, we'll get it all
Okay.
together.
Okay. All
Uh,
right. I can do that. Well, thank you,
hand it
everybody.
over
If there's
to-
no more questions, I guess we're adjourned.
I'm going to hand it over to Dana Cobb to close us out.
Okay.
Well, again, thank you, Dr. Stewart. I mean, the graphics and that you shared were just so spot on, and I also respond to pictures as well as words. I'm a multi type learner, and so I had not seen those, and so I cannot tell you how valuable they'll be, just in my work. And so thank you so much for that. I know the participants, just by the comments, are just overwhelmed and so appreciative of you taking your time out this morning to be with us. I do want to remind the participants, it'll take about 2 weeks time we gather the recordings, the slides, get the certificates together before we can send that out. I also want to remind the participants that you have to be a paid member of one of the councils to receive the NASW CEU certificate. Everybody is eligible for a participant certificate. And you say, why is membership important? We do host in-person events as well. And we also have, when we host online speakers, sometimes when we bring them in from other places, we have to pay a fee. And so those fees go to pay for speakers and foods and venue rentals and those kinds of things. So, and it also just shows your support and brings together a collaborative group of people working towards the same goal, making a collective impact. So, so that's why our fees are very minimal, but very important. Again, thank you, Dr. Stewart. We get to spend 3 days or 2 days with Dr. Stewart next week at Montgomery Bell State Park as part of our commission retreat. So we always continue to learn from her and just inspired and in awe of everything that she does. So again, thank you, Dr. Stewart. Thank you to all the participants, and we hope y'all have a great day and find a warm jacket. So thank y'all for attending. Bye.